You can declutter. And this is why people say, oh, I've tried minimalism. I've tried this. And I'm always like, you don't know your psychology of ownership. You don't know what motivates you to buy certain things. You don't know what your attachments are, right? And I always say minimalism for me was like the gateway to learning how to live with intention. It started with my closet, started with my home decor, and then it trickled to every area in my life. It forced me to confront limiting beliefs and behaviors. It forced me to look at friendships that, which ones are genuine, which ones are transactional, right? Like it forces you to really confront yourself.
Welcome to the Next Best Thing podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Cline-Thomas. Now, I'm here to help you live the life that you design instead of choosing a life you think you have to settle for. Really, truly, please let these conversations be your guide. They are my guide. And let me tell you what, I am so much better for it. Please hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode. I am sorry. I am a little bit disjointed right now because I don't record these intros until after the interview. And I just completed this interview. Man, you guys are in store for something pretty incredible. This is exactly what I needed to hear in this very, very right time. At the start of the year, I wrote down who I wanted to talk to this year on the podcast, and then just was like, girl, start reaching out, right? And so Christine Platt was top 10. I didn't actually know her government name, which you'll hear me telling her. I knew her as the Afro Minimalist, and I started following her account during COVID, I think, or maybe before COVID, but around that time. And just, she has such a beautiful aesthetic, and what she was talking about minimalism, it wasn't really something that I had heard about before. But as I've gone through this process of navigating my next, and it's a circle, right? It's not a straight line where there's a beginning, middle, and end. It's a circle, right? Of constantly asking yourself critical questions. But what I know to be true now is that when you're 10 toes down in your next, you can't just like tweak or change one area of your life without it impacting other areas of your life too. So what happened for me is that I thought, oh, girl, you just going to be real cute and you're just going to change careers. Isn't that really cute? No, what happened was that my whole life was on the table. Every relationship, my faith, myself, my family, everything had to be scrutinized. So that also includes your environment and all your stuff, your material stuff and your emotional stuff. Yes, this conversation is about minimalism, but we're not talking about just cleaning your closet. Okay, let's just be clear about what this conversation is. We're talking about getting very mindful and very intentional about every single choice you make and every single thing and person in your life. Let's zoom in even further and put it within the context of America right now. It is rudderless. It is boundaryless. We are being gaslit at every turn, like literally lied to. And so if you do not have a firm foundation, you are kind of waging a war that you can't win, right? I would go as far as to say that you don't really stand a chance if you aren't really firm in your foundation, because you will go where the wind blows, and a lot of the wind is not going to be serving us. Let's just put it in that way, is not going to be serving us. And so, as I've said this entire year, the focus is on dotting our I's and crossing our T's, and really, because I feel like there's less room for error, and that we can't keep putting things off till tomorrow and next week and next month, because so much is happening right now. Now, Christine's process of finding minimalism and operating within the space that she is actually kind of created and curated for herself, it began while she was knee deep in her next. And it wasn't a smooth, easy, or cute process. And that's exactly where I wanted to start this conversation. So without further ado, here is Christine Platt. Chrissy, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here, for chatting. As we were saying before we hit record, this book, your work has always been relevant, but right now it's like you were ahead of your time. It's like you were ahead of your time.
Listen, I was just telling someone that the other day. I was like, man, it was kind of wild to write that book during the pandemic. And I was thinking more along the lines of like, oh, everyone is going to be home with their stuff, and a lot of people did find freedom and liberation during the pandemic with that book. But man, had I known this was coming, and it's been beautiful seeing the Afro Minimalist Guide like find new audiences. It's been really special. It's been really special.
Because that's how I actually knew you, as the Afro Minimalist. I didn't even know your real name. I was like, so I at the beginning of the year, I made a list of people that I wanted to talk to, and it was Afro Minimalist.
It took, I'm glad you said that though, Andrea, because it took over my life. Like Afro
Mhm.
Minimalist took over my life, and I started to only be known as the Afro Minimalist. And so you weren't alone. A lot of people didn't know what my real name was. And I'd be walking down the streets of DC and people would be like, Afro Minimalist, and yeah, I mean, I have a whole career and a whole body of work and so many things that I love before I wrote the Afro Minimalist Guide. And so, yeah, that's the reason why I changed my handle to my name. Because a lot of people, yeah, it really started a movement, and I'm really proud of that. And even though the times are less than ideal, it is beautiful to see that movement continue in this season that we're in.
And so, picking up the book, The Afro Minimalist Guide to Living with Less, I thought it was going to be a how to manual. Like, just, okay, all right, you shouldn't have so much stuff. Like, let me help you clean out your
Right.
closet. And then you hit me with the frying pan in the beginning, which was like
Snatched you up.
it snatched me all the way up, which is perfect for this podcast because we all talk about your next and how your next, like what it can look like, and navigating it and that messiness of it. And so how you came to asking yourself this question, creating your own minimalist movement was in the thick of your next. Take people to where you were in that moment in your life.
It was in retrospect, it was such an interesting time. And we're literally here at like the 10-year mark. So in March 2015 is when I independently published my first book called The Truth About a We Tea. I was working as a senior policy advisor at the Department of Energy at the time. And one of my friends was like, let's do NaNoWriMo. Let's do National Novel Writing Month. And I was like, that sounds so nerdy. And I was like, yes, girl, count me in. Let's do it. And writing that book sort of reawakened this love that I had for storytelling that I had long since forgotten about. I mean, anyone who has ever gone to law school, practiced law, worked in, that industry, I mean, they suck all the creativity out of you. It is very much, black letter law. And so I'd forgotten this love that I had for creative writing and storytelling. And that's what really awakened that. And I wanted to pursue it. And so I quit my good government job,
Good government job.
much to a lot of people's dismay, and decided that I was going to pursue writing full time. And what that did was land me at home for more time than I'd ever been at home in my life, right? Because when we think about it, at least prior to the pandemic, we spent most time outside of our homes rather than in our homes. So imagine me being at home every day and being confronted with just how much stuff I had. Like I could not, even though it was organized chaos, okay? It wasn't hoarder level. It was a different type of hoarding. I made it look nice and neat and presentable, whatever, right? But I had so much stuff that I didn't need, use, or really even love. And so it started me down this path of like, how can I have less stuff? Right. Unbeknownst to me, I would also soon find myself in the midst of a divorce. Right. And so very quickly, this idea, like, minimalist by choice, like, let me see how I can get rid of some things, became minimalist by circumstance. I had left my good government job, so I didn't have a job. I had the condo that I live in now. I had been renting it out during our marriage. Um, and very quickly realized the challenges that come with over consumption when we find ourselves in those moments of like, well, what am I going to do next, right? And I realized like, wow, I need money. I can't eat these handbags. I can't eat these
Yes.
clothes, right? Like I had spent a lot of money on things instead of saving. And I want to also be very clear because my ex-husband is a dear friend of mine. I don't want it to sound like he left me out and left me out high and dry.
Right.
So I want to be clear about that. But very much found myself a divorcee and trying to figure out like what is next. And I said, when I moved back into this condo, and going forward in my life, like I'm never going to overconsume. I'm never going to have more than I need ever again. And I was very intentional about filling this space. And I shared my journey online as the Afro Minimalist because I tried the whitewash version of minimalism. I hated it. I had like there was at one point this house was everything was white. Everything was barren, and I was like, "Oh, no. This is
Mm-mm.
depressing. I can't do this." I was like, "I'm just gonna have to be the Afro minimalist because 'cause I'm gonna infuse history and culture," and so I started this Instagram, and I said, "Hey, and just in case there's anyone else out there that, wants to really learn about the practice of minimalism, which is living with intention over the aesthetics of minimalism, I'm gonna share my journey on this account." And lo and behold, it turns out people of all races, nationalities, and backgrounds don't want to live in an all white, barren space. And so it became sort of this online movement first. And I met so many wonderful people who were doing minimalism their own way, from people who were living in tiny houses, from people who were living on school buses, right? Like it
Mhm.
was this whole community out there. And I was like, wow, we've done such a disservice to the minimalist lifestyle by having it have this singular aesthetic. And then the pandemic hit, and my agent at the time, she said, "I think this could be a good time to write that Afro minimalist book." And I was like, "What Afro minimalist? What Afro minimalist book, girl? I mean, I had books under contract. I was writing for kids. I was um, working on this book, Rebecca, Not Becky. And yeah, she said, like, I mean, think about it. Like, everyone is going to be where you were a few years ago, which is sitting at home being forced to confront their overconsumption. And so the movement kind of grew also online during the pandemic because everybody was online.
Mhm.
Um, and that's really, I feel like, when I became known as only the Afro minimalist,
Right.
being online and sharing that part of my journey. And that book was written and published all within 1 year. It's what's called
Wow.
a crash book. And I'm really proud of it. I wanted to make sure that people, I mean, again, when we look at minimalist living, when we look at, and people talk about being a mindful consumer, it has a very singular aesthetic, but also it doesn't get into why we're
Yes.
consumers and why we consume so much. And so that is why when you picked up the book, you got hit over the head with the psychology of ownership
Mhm.
because I wanted people to first understand the why and then move into letting go of the stuff, right? Because if you don't understand the why, you're just going to keep getting more stuff, right? Like you can
Mhm.
declutter. And this is why people say, "Oh, I've tried minimalism. I've tried this." And I'm always like, you don't know your psychology of ownership. You don't know what motivates you to buy certain things. You don't know what your attachments are, right? And if you're a person of color, if you are a member of the global majority, you are also unaware often of some of the cultural expectations and societal expectations that have also gone into our over consumption, our need to feel like we have to consume, right? Whether it be for appearances, and it doesn't even necessarily often have to be for societal appearances. Sometimes it's familial, right? I've had
Mhm.
folks come up to me and say, man, I am the first person in my family to X, Y, and Z. And it's just me. And I feel like I have to have this big house. I have to have this car. Otherwise, they're going to think, what are they going to think of me? Right. And so understanding like there's so much that goes into our consumption that we need to understand before we pick up that donation bag and get ready to start decluttering. So this book is everything that like I wish I had known before I thought I could declutter my closet in a weekend and ended up crying on the floor. Like, what? Online they make it seem like, like this is a weekend warrior type mission,
Mhm.
right? Like, yeah, you can declutter it in a weekend and hold it and see if it sparks joy. And I was like, I mean, stuff that sparked joy is part of the problem. Everything was sparking joy. But did I need it, use it, and love it? And speaking of Marie Kondo, there are a number of wonderful practitioners. I love and admire her work so much. Courtney Carver, even the minimalist, Josh and Ryan. I think that people can take bits and pieces from all of our advice, right? And sort of tailor minimalism and make it your own. So that is my sort of approach to minimalism. That is what I want people to do. I love KonMariing my closet, but I'm never going to use her folding technique because I don't have dressers um, in my home. Because for me, dressers are storage facilities. That is what I learned. If I have a dresser, I'm going to hide something in it,
Mm.
right? So it's like learning your practices, learning what motivates you, what your attachments are, and why, and then figuring out how to not only let go, but how to maintain the lifestyle going forward. I know I just said a whole lot, but
No, it's
honestly,
so
you can
good.
tell I'm like
No,
so
no.
passionate
No, this is
about
so
this.
good. I was just thinking, I was sitting here, I was like, ooh, this is just so juicy and
I'm
good.
so passionate
Okay.
about it.
No, it's so good because, one of the things I learned, so I say I blew up my life and it's I wanted to change my career. And that's what I thought I
Mm,
was just doing. Right.
yeah.
But you
Yeah.
can't just blow up one area and then not have at least shrapnel all up in this
Listen,
other.
it's about to trickle
It's
into
it's gonna
every area.
trickle. Get ready, get ready, get ready, right? Because whether you're ready for it or not, it's going to happen. So what I learned is like if I'm creating a new framework to live in this way, then I have to ask those very same questions of my personal life, of
Yeah.
myself. I have
Yeah.
to and then everything is on the table.
It's
And
so
so
true.
yeah, and
It's
so we're
so
not
true.
talking about that dress from that special event 5 years ago.
Right.
We like the stuff is just a manifestation. It's like language.
Yes, it's a visual representation of a deeper, I don't want to say issue because issue is not the right word. I mean, I think language matters so much in this work and reframing matters so much, right? Like, people will say, like, I mean, I'm going to trash this, right? And it's like, I don't want you to think about it as trash because the minute you think about it as trash, you think it can't be of service to someone else,
Mm-hmm.
right? Using even, I've had folks who, one of the things I mentioned in the book is like, again, being mindful of language and using words like purge, right? I had a lot of people who had been very affected by diet culture write to me and say, thank you so much, for saying that. So I want people to be very mindful of language, right? But you're so right in the sense that it really does trickle into every area. And even if you think, like me, naively, thinking I was going to declutter my closet in the weekend,
Yeah.
right? Like it starts getting at this deeper issue, right? It's like, why am I seeing all this stuff with the tag still on. Why are all the tags red?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why have I not worn some of this? Right? What? Okay, clearly I'm in love with the thrill of the hunt and not the reward itself. Right? And so it's to your point, you just start thinking more critically about your decisions. And what I always say is, there's no way that you can just be intentional with your closet and your home decor, not feel what that intentionality does to you, right? Like walking into your home and you've been so intentional with everything and you love it. It's impossible not to want to experience that intentionality in every area of your life. It's impossible.
But tell us what you had the home and the suburbs. You're married, mother, you had your good government job. Your theme music was turned up because you're like, no, I'm going to be a storyteller. I'm going to lean into my African American, you know, uh, degree, your degree in African American history. And then things didn't go as planned. And when you were looking around your space in the moments, especially in the moments when you're getting rejected from jobs, because this is things that people are experiencing in mass right now, you're getting the rejection emails or letters back from jobs that you were interested in. What was looking around your stuff? What was the story that you had told yourself that was no longer true?
Yeah, I mean, I think so the first story that I told myself, was that I deserve. This is how I got all the stuff to begin with, right? Like, oh, I work so hard, I deserve this, right? Oh, I work so hard, I have earned this, right? As opposed to saying, I hate working this hard. Right? Like,
Ooh.
it was oftentimes that is what it was I mean, if I'm gonna have to work this hard, I'm gonna have to
Oh
make it worth my
gosh.
while, right?
That's
But
loud. That's
it
loud.
is. I mean, listen,
That's loud.
I'm loud, right? I say it in as soft a tone as possible in the audiobook, but I still get people are like, "Why were you yelling at me?" Uh, but yeah, I mean, that was just like the first story, like, when I look back, that was the first story that I realized was not true, but it took me sitting with all of this stuff saying, "You bought all of this stuff in the hopes of trying to make yourself happy because you were really miserable in Big Law." Like, you hated it, right? And so it made me feel better to buy nice things or things that I wanted with that money that I'd earned, but it was temporary. It's always a temporary high, a temporary dopamine hit, right? Um, and then as I start to transition and I'm going through the divorce, really being forced to confront the fact that, like, wow, I also was not being very mindful about my consumption, right? Like, one of the stories that I told myself, I mean, look, I have a bachelor's, I have a master's, I have a law degree. I'm never going to be without a job. I don't need to worry about saving the way other people do, right? Like, there are
Mm.
all these things, even if you don't say it aloud, internally, right? Like, there are narratives that we convince ourselves that dictate our actions and the choices that we make. So that was another one that I had to confront. I never thought I would be in a position where I would need to be reliant or dependent on savings, right? So as a result, I didn't have any, right? So then I move into the space and I'm looking for jobs and I think what's so funny, I must have applied for every single job at the African American History Museum, right? I'm like, how many people with a bachelor's and master's in Black studies and a law degree are willing to be your educational specialist? And it was like, and you got nothing, right? Like, I wouldn't even get an interview, right? And so having to confront that narrative, and in retrospect, and I did end up I've done amazing work with the museum since, but in retrospect, I had to sit in that moment. So sometimes we think when are these blessings coming? How is this possible? In retrospect, I had to sit in those moments of discomfort, right? I'd since done amazing work with the museum and loved so many of the teams there. But at the time, had I gotten that job, had that thing happened, I would have never learned the lessons that I was supposed to learn, right? So oftentimes we're so upset in these moments, which I now know there's a beautiful word for these moments. It's called liminality.
Mm.
And liminality is being in the in between, not where you were. You don't know where you're going. You know, you can't go back to where you were. You're in this in between. And those seasons of liminality are so uncomfortable. They're so dissettling. They're so hurtful and painful. I remember calling one of my dear girlfriends, Ebony, and I was just like, girl, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I mean, like, I was having a pity party and she let me get it out. And then she said, you know, Christine, she was like, I know this feels very permanent for you, right? So she said, I don't want to discredit anything. She's like, but I just cannot come to this pity party. She said, because everything that you're going through right now is temporary. And I just remember being like, wow,
Mhm.
right? Like, this is what you need your good friends,
Yes, this
your
is what
good,
your
honest
squad.
friends for,
Right.
right? And realizing that these seasons of liminality are temporary. So you have to sit in that discomfort, learn whatever lessons you're supposed to be learning, right? So that when the season is over, you move on better, more mindful, more aware, more intentional, more in touch and in tune with who you are, right? And in the hopes that you never find yourself again in that season of liminality. And I remembered saying, when I get a job again, when this happens again, when I will never find myself in a situation where I can't provide or I'm worried about providing for me and my daughter was younger at the time. She's 21 now. But it was a very I had to sit in that discomfort in that season and it was tough. And I did confront a lot of narratives. And also I want to say, Andrea, a lot of identities, right?
Mm.
We don't think about the identities that we have. And so part of that overconsumption also came from this identity that I'm a Black woman in law. I'm one of the few, at the time, I was one of the few Black women in energy law, one of the few Black women at the firms that I worked at.
Yes.
I remember saying, I have to look the part. I have to look a certain way. I have to carry certain handbags. I have to wear certain shoes. I have to. And that's sort of being a Black woman in this predominantly white space, how to show up, how to perform became an identity, right? And that identity had to be shattered. Other identities that we have, and I talk about this a little bit in Less is Liberation, is, people pleasing is an identity, right? I'm the helper. I'm the fixer. I'm the person that people always go to when they need, right? Holding on to those types of identities can cause us a lot of harm, right? And often it's when we push back, we decide, Not today. I just can't help anybody today." And
Mhm.
people have never heard us say no before, and
Right.
everything, like you said, blows up. And then we find ourselves in these seasons of liminality again. And we're like, how did I get here?
Mhm.
And so I think so much of this journey, and I always say minimalism for me was like the gateway to learning how to live with intention. It started with my closet, started with my home decor, and then it trickled to every area in my life. It forced me to confront limiting beliefs and behaviors. It forced me to look at friendships that, which ones are genuine, which ones are transactional, right? Like it forces
Oh
you to
boy.
really confront yourself. Because I'm always like, it has nothing to do with the things, right? And
Nothing.
there's always someone who's asking, but what about my partner? It has nothing to do with your partner, right? it at the end of the day, it is forcing you to really take an introspective look at who you are. And rarely do we stop to do that. Rarely do we make time to do that until we are forced in those seasons of liminality. And we're like, how did I get here? Right. So I'm probably a much bigger fan of, being down on your luck or being down because I know some of the greatest lessons and blessings are learned and earned during those seasons. So I hope that's encouraging to someone who is in their season of liminality. Please know it is just temporary, and you are there to learn some very important and critical lessons about who you are. And I promise you will emerge stronger, better, more aware, more intentional on the other side. But we only learn that in seasons of discomfort.
Yeah, learned and earned. I like that.
Learned and
I'm
earned.
gonna adopt that for sure. Let's talk about the how to though. Where
Yes.
do you even begin? And what questions are you asking yourself?
First of all, there are many different ways to be introspective about this work and asking yourself these questions. And Less is Liberation talks about letting go of limiting behaviors and beliefs. And so I have a different sort of process for that, which I'll share in a minute. But I, of course, started with my things and home decor. Highly recommend. I think it's a great place to start doing this work. And in the Afro Minimalist Guide, I share 4 steps that would have helped me at the time. And it's what I ultimately ended up having to do to sort of move through the work. And so step 1 is acknowledge, right? Acknowledge that you have more than you need, right? If you are not an overconsumer, acknowledge whatever it is that you need to acknowledge about where you are and how you got there, right? And that acknowledgement process is asking yourself those tough questions, right? It is asking how, when, what was I, it's like getting to those kind of really deep inquiries that usually it's almost like a snowball effect, right? Like you ask the one question, why do I have so much stuff, right? And it's like because you keep buying so much stuff. But it's like, well, why do I keep buying so much stuff? Because you have a problem with spending. Well, why do I have a problem with spending? You know, it kind of started when you were X, Y, and Z years old. Well, why did it start then? Well, you and your mom used to always go shopping at the mall, right? Like it causes you to sort of drill down deeper. That acknowledgement process, though, it awakens and unearths all sorts of things that we have buried over time. And I like to tell people, almost like think of it as like all of the answers are like sediment at the bottom of a pond. You go in there, you're just like stirring around, poking around, looking around, and then all the stuff starts coming to the surface and it's overwhelming, right? And
Mhm.
you start to experience myriad emotions. I mean, I cried. I was angry. I was angry at other people. I was sad. You know what I mean? I felt so irresponsible. I mean, like there were all these narratives and emotions that were centered around the decisions and choices that I had made. And that's what led to step 2, which is forgiveness. And I feel like this is something that is rarely talked about in lifestyle work. Um, but it's really important. And that forgiveness is not only for yourself, you extend it also to anyone who knowingly or unknowingly you feel may be responsible for where
Mhm.
you are, right? For me at the time, it was, you know, like, man, how come nobody told me to stop buying all this crap? Right? How come, why did my mom take me to the mall instead of taking me to the park? Like you start to point fingers because you're just so angry and you're feeling so many different things. And I realized I was never going to be able to move on in the process if I didn't forgive myself. Can't I mean, how can I hold myself accountable for things that I didn't know at the time,
Mhm.
right? How can I hold people who I know love me and want the best for me accountable, right? When I know that they were just trying to do their best, right? And so that forgiveness, and I include a forgiveness prayer in the Afro Minimalist Guide, because, sometimes we don't even know how to forgive. It's one of those things
Yes.
that people tell us to do, but we don't even know how to do it. And so including that in there, and that forgiveness is what allows you to move on to step 3, which is let go. And when it comes to our things, again, not to come down on Marie Kondo, but it has sometimes it's about more than what sparking joy, right?
Right.
If I have a lot of things that spark joy. And so for me, having a more holistic framework was very helpful. So I had to look at things and say, is this something I need? Is this something I'm going to use? And is this something that I love? And I couldn't look at those things individually, right? I couldn't look
Hmm.
at those standards individually. I had to need it, use it, and love it, right? And whatever I didn't need, use, and love went on to step 4, which is paying it forward. Thinking of ways that I can use this item. Is there anyone in my community that can benefit from this item, right? Is there an organization that can benefit from this item? Being very intentional about making sure I am not contributing an item to a landfill, right? That is going
Hmm.
to be around for a long period of time. And so, that was a big part of the work for me with Afro Minimalist. Of course, I was going through it, bumbling through it, figuring it out for myself at the time, but being able to write about it, looking back in retrospect and saying, oh, this is what I was doing. These are the 4 steps that I followed over and over and over again.
Yeah, in your new book, Less is Liberation, Finding Freedom from the Life of Overwhelm, give us a sneak peek about the next level that you're unlocking here.
Yes. So Less is Liberation, man, it is a project that is so near and dear to my heart. And a big part of that is because it is an extension of the Afro Minimalist Guide. It was like, what did I go through next? And I went through this process of really trying to figure out, man, how can I be intentional in every area of my life? And what is prohibiting me from doing that? And I realized I had a lot of limiting behaviors that stemmed from limiting beliefs that I had about myself and how I should move through the world. And so the book is really helping people get to the heart of what those limiting beliefs are, figuring out how to create a new liberating belief, because we can always reframe our story. We can always
Mhm.
reframe our circumstances, and how to move forward. And one of the things that I realized with Overwhelm, and I had to do like a lot of deep dive into definitions, right? And so, Afro Minimalist Guide, we're looking at the psychology of ownership. I feel like with Less's Liberation, I was looking at like the psychology of overwhelm because I'm like, I want to know more about overwhelm. It was just a statement that I would throw out anytime someone would say, how are you feeling? I'd be like, oh, so overwhelmed. Right. And thinking about,
Yes.
well, what does that actually mean? And to embody overwhelm as a state of being.
Mm,
Oh, it makes me very emotional to think about how many of
yeah,
us, especially people of color, especially women, how overwhelm has become our baseline.
our
We don't
baseline.
even realize that we have embodied overwhelm as a state of being. And it is literally feeling like you are in a place of unable to cope with your life and your
Mhm.
circumstances. And for that to be a state of being causes a lot of problems. And what I realized is that overwhelm is actually tied to our wellness. When I originally pitched the book proposal, the wellness component wasn't part of it because I had never associated overwhelm with my overall well being. I mean, to say that aloud sounds, like, well, duh. But I just didn't see it. It was like, I'm overwhelmed. Maybe I'm overwhelmed by my job. Maybe I'm overwhelmed by my circumstances. But I never looked at it from a wellness perspective and the idea that it is our body literally trying to send us a sign, a signal that something needs to change, right? Like having moments of overwhelm, having it being tied to a certain situation or a certain time period, that's one thing. But to embody it as a state of being means that it has literally become your baseline and you are moving through the world in a state of being unwell, right? And it took me going to visit an integrative health doctor because I found out a hard way, like most people do, with overwhelm and wellness, is that, I went for a routine checkup and she's like, taking my blood pressure. She's like, wait, 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 wait. She's like, can you sit still? And I'm like, I am sitting still. And she's like, no, no, just like and I'm like, what is going on? I mean, next thing I know, they're looking for the cardiac specialist, the nurse is flying. And I'm like, what is going on? I had stage 2 hypertension, borderline stage 3,
Wow.
literally was on the cusp of a medical emergency. And I promise you, Andrea, at the time, now that I know different, but at the time I felt fine. I'm like, what do you mean? And
Yes.
they're like,
Oh
you're
my
not
gosh.
dizzy? You're not dizzy? You drove here? I mean, like, they are beside themselves. They are trying to figure out whether they should send me to the ER. And I'm looking at everyone in the room like, what do you mean? I feel fine. Having high stage 2 hypertension had become my baseline.
Had become your baseline.
It felt normal.
Normal. Oh,
Now, when I look at that girl sitting and when I look back and I look at that girl sitting in that room, I'm like, I should have keeled over. You know what I mean? Like, I can't even imagine living with that level of overwhelm. Like, I can't. But at the time, it felt very normal. And so I wanted to use Les's liberation to sort of illustrate that. Finding freedom from a life of overwhelm means prioritizing your overall well-being. That's
mhm.
what it means, right? And so I love frameworks because we have to
We
have
have to have them.
we have to have them, right? And I tell people all the time because I mean I've started to talk about the book and I've been at workshops and I mean people have like burst into tears. Everyone has their health story. And I'm just like, listen, when we don't have a framework to assess how we feel, when we don't have language, right? We are at a deficit, right? Like had someone said, your wellness is tied to these 5 core foundations, which is what I found out going to an integrative health doctor. Um, Dr. Giamesha, shout out to
Mhm.
Dr. Giamesha, who's a wonderful integrative health doctor here in DC. She was the one who taught me about the 5 foundations of wellness. I'd never heard about it in my life. And she said she was also the one who told me that I was unwell. And
Sometimes it takes the outside voice. It
I
takes
was
it.
so confused. And I was like, I mean, I know I don't feel good, but what do you mean I am unwell? And she said, have you ever heard about the 5 foundations of wellness? And I said, no. She said, it's your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, your social health, and your spiritual health, which is less about religion and more about like your purpose. And feeling like you're contributing to the world in which we live. And she said, in many medical practices, not just integrative health, traditional health, holistic health, we look at those 5 foundations, and if any one of those foundations is off, we consider that person unwell. So I said, Dr. Giamesha, we call her Dr. G. I'm like, Dr. G, so you're telling me that all these people are walking around here unwell? She said, absolutely. Right? Like, something is off. That feeling of overwhelm, something is off physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, or spiritually that we've been taught to just like push through. And she said, the thing is, Christine, you can and you will be well because our bodies are always, always, always trying to be well. We just have to learn to listen. We just have to learn to listen, right? And if I could go all the way back to 2015, had I had that framework, I would have realized, right? Like why I would feel so overwhelmed by my things, right? Why I would feel so overwhelmed in the workplace, right? Like spiritually, my well was drained, right? Socially, my well was drained, right? Mentally, right? Like there were all these things that were just depleting me, but I didn't know to listen to my body. I didn't have a framework to stop and assess and say, which one of your wells feels drained and where do you need to be filled? So that's a big part of less is liberation. That's sort of fill the wells approach and being very intentional to not only keep your wells filled, like fill them now, but also like keep them filled and maintain that sense of wellness that keeps you from living in a constant state of overwhelm. So that's less is liberation. I'm very excited
I'm
about
very
this book.
excited too. I'm very excited about it too. Have you heard? The Next Best Thing is not just a podcast, it's now a whole community. Every month, you get hands-on workshops with experts, clarity conversations with me, and a whole squad that is cheering you on through the ups and the downs. We keep it all the way real over there. So join our squad. All you have to do to sign up is click the link in the show description. I can't wait to see you there. Our last segment is called Act Up ACT. Those are my initials. Somebody is listening to this or
I love
watching
that.
this. And they're like, I might need a Dr. Giamesha up in my
Yes.
situation here. What are the first steps that they can take today to kind of get them closer to where they want to be?
I mean, the first step is, well, first of all, I highly recommend integrative health, right? And they actually work together with your primary care physician. So it's not in lieu of, you don't have to like leave your current medical doctor, current medical practice, but they work together, right? And they do try and find more holistic ways to manage our well being. In the event that that is not an option for you based on where you live or your financial circumstances, we can all use the 5 foundations of wellness to self assess how we are feeling day to day, moment to moment, right? I am very intentional about, all right, let me do a little check in, right? Let me think about what's my physical well looking like? Have I gotten enough rest? Am I eating a balanced meal? Have I gotten my movement throughout the day? That's your physical well, right? And by the way, I said movement throughout the day, not 15 minutes at the gym, not 30 minutes at the gym. Our bodies are meant to move throughout the day. This is how we keep our physical well filled, right? Emotionally, I check in. How am I feeling? Is there anything, do I need to emote something? Do I have a safe space to emote, right? Checking in on my emotions and really seeing like, how do I feel emotionally right now? Our mental well, so important, especially right now, right? And thinking of ways, I mean, this podcast is a perfect example of filling your mental well, learning something new, right? Being engaged or listening to an engaging conversation that is going to enlighten your personal experience, is a big part of our mental well. I think oftentimes we only equate it to like, do I have a therapist? Right. And it's like you may only see your therapist weekly, monthly, quarterly, right? How can you assess your own mental health every day? Right. And we know what drains us mentally, right? And being very mindful of not putting ourselves in circumstances and situations that are going to be mentally draining. Or if we know that is unavoidable, making sure that mental well is full. I'm talking about it's so full, it's trickling over, right? I know I have to go do this tomorrow. I know I have to go see so and so. I know I have to, work on this team project at work. I am not doing a whole lot the night before that is going to deplete my mental well. In fact, I am going to be filling it up as much as possible so that I can be mentally healthy and sound as I move through that, situation or circumstance, right? Next, we have our social well. I think also a really important well for us to talk about during this time, right? And that is a big part of like what situations, relationships, which ones are genuine and which of these are transactional.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, we don't want to acknowledge the relationships in our lives that are transactional. You have too many transactional relationships, though. That social well is being emptied. Some people are unwell simply because their social well is drained dry, right? They are always pouring out, giving to others, being of service, but nothing is getting poured back in, right? And again, this is, that social well, you have to also be very intentional about managing those relationships. And I have a whole slew of folks that help me. So I also want to be very clear on that. But one of my also dear friends is a Reiki practitioner, Sam Pendleton. And I remember when I first started, I didn't have the language at the time, but I first started, assessing like, man, I was like, I feel like somebody is always asking me for something. I'm so tired. Everybody needs me. I can't do it anymore. Right. And I remember we had this beautiful Reiki session. And at the end, she said to me, she said, Christine, you have evolved. And whatever you were getting from being needed in that way, you no longer need that to be validated anymore.
Oh, wow.
She said, so that's why you're annoyed. That's why all of a sudden you loved these identities before, right? And so she said, here's what I want you to do and what you're going to have to do. She said, I want you to be very gentle as you manage these relationships going forward. Some of them are going to fall away the first time you say no, right? But
Mm-hmm.
others you have cultivated and established a transactional friendship. That you created that. And she said, I want you to be very gentle and very kind as you let some of these relationships go. She said, because you created these monsters.
Wow. That's like choking me up. That's that definitely hits home.
Listen,
That definitely that
right? And like
definitely hits home.
this is the work of working on yourself. When we talk about
Yeah.
being intentional, when we talk about asking those questions and getting to the why is somebody always asking me for stuff?
Mhm.
Well, you created that dynamic. You created that dynamic of the friendship. This is how you learn to show people that you love them is by doing for them,
Mhm.
right? Oftentimes people weren't even asking for my help. One of the examples that I like to give at workshops, because I feel like so many of us are this way, that sort of I call people pleasing an affliction. So we have this affliction.
It is an affliction.
It's an
It is.
affliction. It
It
is an
is.
affliction. Okay. And so we have this affliction, and I'm like, here is how it shows up sometimes. People are not even asking for our help, Andrea.
Mhm.
It could be a stranger walking down the street, and they're like, man, I wish I had a stamp. I used to be the person who was like, I have a stamp. You need a stamp? Right? Didn't
That
ask
is so
me
mean.
for a
This is
stamp.
so loud. This is so loud. It's so
Right? They're like, oh, you
loud.
have a stamp? I'll be like, yes. They pull it out. I'm are you gonna mail that? Because I'm gonna walk by the post office. I will gladly, it's on my way. I will gladly do that. All the person said, directly or indirectly, was, man, I wish I had a stamp. Next thing you know, I have deviated from whatever I had planned to do. I have given them my stamp, which I might need one day. Right? Mad that no one else has a stamp. I have put it on their envelope and I am on my way to the post office. Right? Like understanding that these are the choices and decisions that we're making. So that social well, whew, that one that we got to do a lot of work there. We have to do
That's
a
like
lot of work
choking me.
there.
I'm there.
I think
I'm
so many
there.
of us. I think so
Yeah.
many of us, and we feel it, and we get so mad when there's
Hmm.
no reciprocity, right? And you start to realize I have really established a really beautiful community. I mean, I feel so grateful. There's so much reciprocity. There's so much. I mean, my wells are filled every day with these beautiful friendships and people that I have in my life who also understand that sometimes I need space, to fill my wells. Like it is just a beautiful community. You start to realize which connections are genuine and folks that you're in alignment with, right? But yeah, a lot of work there in that social well. I feel like that's the well that's the well that has a lot of people unwell. Because again, you only need one well to not be at capacity to be deemed unwell. And then that last area of our health, that spiritual well, I think is another sort of challenging well for us to dig in and get to the bottom of with, what's settled down there at the bottom. Because that well is like, what is our purpose, right? What meaningful contributions are we making to the world? I think also, especially for people of the African diaspora, there is a sort of spiritual, more like religious spiritual component to that and understanding a deeper part of our history. I love that the movie Sinners is out right now. There's my ancestral altar
Hmm.
right there, right? I mean, I feel like there are ways that we um also, because I don't want people to think like if you don't have a religious practice or you don't have a spiritual practice that well is not going to be filled. But I do want to say that if you do have a religious practice and you do have like a spiritual practice that you have, if you have neglected that, if that is something that has historically grounded you and helped you stay centered and proud of who you are and the work that you do, when you neglect that well, when you're too busy to pray, when you're too busy to sit at your altar, when you're too busy to go to church, that spiritual well is getting depleted. So I think sitting down and also being mindful and saying, what do I really think about the work that I'm doing, right? Again, if I were to go back to 2015, my spiritual well was so drained just from the work that I was doing. It felt so meaningless. And for me, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, for the law firm itself, for the clients that we were serving, that was their purpose and that was very meaningful to them. But the work wasn't meaningful to me because I wanted to do something that was definitely more in line with helping my people, talking more about history and culture, sharing these lived experiences. And I wasn't able to fulfill that in the role that I had at the time. And so I think we all have, to answer your question, we all have a framework, right? You can Google 5 foundations of wellness and get even more of an explanation than what I just shared. But we all have a way to sort of self assess. And I think that is what we fail to do, whether it be from our overconsumption to our overwhelm. We fail to self assess. We want to look outward and place blame outward instead of looking within and saying, okay, I need to change, right? And today is the day that I start. And maybe you start with one well, maybe you start with one thing. There's a challenge that I did during the pandemic. And I said, listen, the average American household has over 300,000 items. Start with one thing a day. If you don't know where to start with letting go of one thing a day, right? We have to start the inner work, the beautiful inner work of self assessment. If we ever want to change and if we ever want to live more intentionally, and if we want to reduce the overwhelm in our lives, if we want to move from and through those seasons of liminality, we have to do the inner work to self assess and be honest with ourselves. about how we got there, and also know that if we are the problem, we are also the solution.
We are also the solution. Christine, thank you. I'm going to try not to like just boohoo cry here
It's
because it's just like
emotional.
it's just such confirmation. And like, you know, you were just talking about like the creativity, like this space was created as the space of, oh my God, I'm blowing up my life. What is it that it's just a core function of like my heart that I love. And it was having conversations with people about things that I really, really care about. And
Yeah.
so just even like just the timing, like everything is perfect and it keeps happening on this podcast, that it's always perfect, that I'm always meeting the people at the time when I really need to hear this. And it's like confirming things that I'm not even saying out loud. So thank you for your work and for being out loud about it and your beautiful aesthetic and teaching me like new things. Because that's the thing is like when you don't grow up with certain things, you have to see like that it's even possible, like to even think like this, to even,
Andrea,
you know, like it's great.
I hate to interrupt you. But before we wrap, I love that you say that, because one thing that I tell people over and over again, whether it comes to our overconsumption, our overwhelm, our overall well-being, man, it's so many of us are first generation of even having the luxury to consider, to even be in this situation, to even be in a circumstance where I've been able to buy more than I could ever possibly use, right? And so again, it goes back to showing ourselves compassion, you know, having and extending that forgiveness to ourselves and others, with the understanding that so many of us are the first generation of even having the privilege to do this type of inner work on ourselves, right? That makes me very emotional. It makes me so proud to be on a podcast like yours. And makes me so proud to be in these conversations, because we are modeling, right? The type of lives that so many of us want to live, it's never been modeled for us. I bought a lot because that's what was modeled. I worked, you know, myself to the bone, to the point of overwhelm being my baseline, because that's what was modeled, right? And it doesn't even have to just be modeled within our homes. It can be modeled within our communities. It can be culturally, generationally, right? And to step outside of that and say, none of this feels good. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I'm about to do something different. I know I'm about to step into this season of liminality. I know that I cannot go back to where I was. I don't know what the future is going to look like for me, but what I know is in this season of liminality, I am going to find a way to live differently for myself, for the next generation. I am going to model what it looks like to live with intention. I am going to model what it looks like to focus on your overall well-being. I am going to show someone that it is possible. What an honor to be one of the many brave people who are making this decision. And so I just want to thank you for saying that. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
This is great.
This is amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to The Next Best Thing with Andrea Cline-Thomas, a Mountain Court Media production. The music was written, recorded, and produced by Gavin Casey, also known as Dark Purple. Now, if you like what you heard, please subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and comment on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to share it with friends. Now, I hope this episode helps you on your journey. See you next time.